The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
It's coming.
All these voices. All these voices.
They're mine. They're not yours. You had no right to them when you were alive, and you have no right to them when you're dead. That's what it sounded like. Good, you know who I am. And you know I'm not playing. You're going to let those women go. In Jesus' name, you're going to let those women go.
Is there a demon here watching us right now? Watching us right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
Good evening, Misfit Sugar Ladies, Monster Lovers, and Demon Hunters. I love you, motherfuckers.
Tonight's episode is going to be very interesting. We're going to be talking about something that probably a lot of people don't even know exists. There are people that do know it exists, but it should be an interesting story. We're going to be talking about the Alamo of the ancient world. Okay, now this isn't the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas. I've been to that Alamo, amazing place, and maybe one day we'll do a show on that because that's a pretty awesome story as well. But this is the Alamo of the ancient world. It took place at a place called Masada. But before we get to the siege at Masada and all the horrible things that took place, we kind of got to go back a little bit first. This was about a century after Jesus. The Jews did not recognize him as the Messiah. They just thought he was a false prophet. And because they didn't recognize him as the Messiah, they were still looking for their Messiah. Now, most of the Jews at that time thought that the Messiah was going to be this military leader that was going to step up and deliver the Jewish people from Rome. And they were going to be this powerful, badass warrior that was going to lead them in battle and free them. So at that time, you had a lot of different rebel groups, let's call them, that were trying to be that Messiah, okay? The leaders of these rebel groups were trying to be the Messiah that the Jewish people were waiting for. So they're kind of squabbling and fighting amongst themselves. Most of the times it's arguments, pushing and shoving, that kind of thing. But on this occasion, it got to be a little bit more than that, and it kind of broke out into a little bit more violence. And there ended up being a riot that was going on between these different rebellious factions who were trying to be the Messiah. So, because Rome is in control of Jerusalem, and pretty much all of Judea at the time, because they're in charge, they got to keep order. So some of the Romans come in to break up this riot between these Jewish rebel groups. Well, somewhere along the line, one of these Jewish rebels thought it would be a great idea to attack the Romans. So that's what they did. They started fighting the Romans, and they killed all of the Roman soldiers over there. They also either killed, beat, or just otherwise drove out of Jerusalem anybody that thought was a Roman sympathizer or that they thought might be in league with Rome, working with Rome in some way. So all those people got driven out as well. So after that happens, the Jewish rebels, they feel pretty damn good about themselves. You know, they just kicked Rome's ass and they sent them packing. You know, that's what they're thinking. So they're celebrating. They're partying up. They're like, oh, this is great. Now, I'm sure there were some among them that were like, this was a dumb idea. Because all we did was take out a handful of guards and some people that we thought might be working with the Romans. We didn't take out Rome. And one thing about Rome, you punch them in the eye like that, they're going to get pissed. And they're going to do something about it. That's what happened. The emperor found out about this, and he was not pleased. So he sent one of his generals and his son to Judea. And he wanted it all shut down. He wanted destruction. He wanted a lot of people made unalive to pay for what had happened. So you had two different Roman armies. Okay, you had the son Titus was in Alexandria in Egypt. So he came down that direction, and then you had his father come the other way. And they kind of met together at the very beginning of Judea, up by Galilee, that area. So they start just destroying everything in sight. Now this army is not a small army. It's multiple armies. It's several Roman legions. It totals about 60,000 men, according to Josephus, who was a Jewish man, but he was a Roman collaborator, and he was a historian. So he kind of wrote the history of the Jewish War. Matter of fact, he wrote a book called The Jewish War. So it's by his account that we know what happened here. So there was about 60,000 Roman soldiers that were just whipping the hell out of anything that moved in Judea. So they started up there by Galilee, and they just started destroying, man. They started killing everything that moved. And they started making their way down through Judea towards Jerusalem. So they finally get to Jerusalem, and there's this little gate that everybody came and went through to get inside of Jerusalem. And the Jewish rebels had shut that gate and barred it because they had a feeling that they were in big trouble, because they had heard that the Romans were there, that they had come to Judea and they were kicking ass. And they're like, that ain't good, man. Let's bar this thing up. So the Romans bust through fairly easily. And they just start pouring into the city. Now, I'm sure some of the Jews thought, well, if we don't fight back, then they'll just conquer us again. And, whoever was responsible will be punished. And some other people may be punished as well. But we have a chance of surviving this thing if we just wait it out. So that's what some of them did. They started destroying everything. Their goal was not to capture or to re-subjugate Jerusalem. Their goal was the utter destruction of Jerusalem. And that's what they set about doing. They started killing everything. They started burning everything. They even flattened the temple. They destroyed it. So they were out for vengeance, and they were out for blood. So you had some Jews there in Jerusalem that tried to fight back against the Romans, and they were slaughtered. And you had a couple thousand that tried to hide and wait it out. They went down into the sewers. And they thought that maybe they could go through the sewers and get out of the city and wait it out in the mountains until everything was cool again and then come back into the city. That was their plan. But it didn't go so well. They found when they got down in the sewers that they couldn't get out, that there was no way out of the city that way, that they were just trapped. They couldn't go back into Jerusalem because the Romans were killing everything up there. So they thought, well, we'll just kind of hang out down here and keep searching for a way out. And, maybe the Romans will kill everything and leave, and then we can come back out. But that's not what happened. The Romans started searching, first building to building, street by street, for anybody that was still alive so that they could kill them. So they made their way down into the sewers, and they discovered that there were a couple thousand people down there in the sewers hiding. So they systematically made their way through the sewers, just hacking to death anybody that was there. So those couple thousand people that went down to the sewers to hide, they ended up dying in those sewers. So after that is finished, they've killed everybody that they can kill. they've completely destroyed the place. Rome thought, yeah, we got our revenge. This is pretty cool. So let's take control of this area again. And let's wipe out any resistance that there is. Okay, anybody that is still trying to rebel against Rome, we'll take care of that. But we've kind of destroyed the city. We've destroyed pretty much everything north of there. So there's not a whole lot left. So, we'll let some of these people that are hiding out in the mountains, we'll let them live. We won't track each one of them down. And we'll just wipe out any resistance that pops up anywhere. So they send word back to Rome. They have like parades in the street, and they're partying and they're celebrating because they put down the rebellion. Well, the emperor is not entirely satisfied by that. He basically, at this point, remember I was talking about the son Titus and his father. The father gets sent back to Rome because he's going to become emperor. Okay, so he's now the emperor. And he's like, we're going to crush any rebellion left in Judea. All of it. You don't have to kill every single person, but we're going to make sure that there is no more rebellion coming out of Judea. I mean, remember, he's a general. He's a military man. So he knows that even a little spark of rebellion can turn into a wildfire that can erupt into a war. So he's crushing all that. So the only place really left that had any chance of anything was a place called Masada. Now, Masada was a fortress on top of a mountain. Sounds pretty cool, right? It was. It was like 400 meters above, or yards above the ground. It's this tall, tall mountain. And on top of this mountain, it's flat. And King Herod the Great had built a badass fortress up there. Okay, and this thing is fully decked out, fully stocked. It's got years and years and years worth of dried grains and food up there that's been dried and preserved so they can live for years off of the food that is already in the warehouses there. He's also got cisterns set up, over a dozen of them. And each one of these cisterns can hold over 1 million gallons of water, and they're all chock full. And they stay full because there's this series of channels and canals that were built to actually have water constantly flowing into Masada. So they got years and years worth of water. They got years and years worth of food. So they're set up. They also have farming going on up there. And it's kind of ingenious the way they did it. It wasn't just rebels in this fortress. Okay, you had a rebel group called the Sicarii that had taken over that fortress before the fall of Jerusalem, before all that had happened. It used to be a Roman garrison, and they had taken it over. And you had their families there, women and children with them as well. And the women would be dove keepers. That's one of the jobs they did. And what a dove keeper was is exactly what it sounds like. They would have a bunch of doves, the bird, and they would keep them and take care of them. Now the bird, they would eat, and then they would poop. That's what animals do, right? That's what we do. We poop. Well, they take all these bird droppings and they use it as a nitrogen-rich form of fertilizer for the crops. And then they have these channels of water that I talked about earlier that are constantly flowing into Masada, so they got all the irrigation they could ever want. So they have seed to plant, they have fertilizer for the fields, and they have water, all the water they need. So they have farms up there growing food. So not only do they have dried food, but they have fresh food that they're able to grow and continually grow because they can harvest it and then get the seed and replant. So they're set. They're set for years and years and years worth of a siege. Well, one thing that happened was a lot of these Jews that were hiding out in the mountains that came from Jerusalem and the surrounding areas and all through Galilee and all of Judea, the ones that were able to escape, they were all kind of like, where do we go now? The Romans have control of everything, and they're killing everything, So they think Masada, that's a fortress, it's fortified, it's up on a mountain, we'll be safe there. And it's in the hands of the rebels, so our people control it. So we can go there and have a safe refuge where we don't have to worry about our kids getting slaughtered. So that's exactly what a lot of these people do, is they make their way to Masada. And they go up there, and of course, the rebel group allows them in because it's their own people. You know, they're all Jewish people. So they allow them in. So you have the rebels, you have the family of the rebels, and then you have a lot of these refugees from the area that have escaped, and they're all making their way to Masada to try to survive. So about 2 years after the fall of Jerusalem, the Romans finally make their way to Masada. They found out about the place, they know where it is, they come up with a plan, they make their way there. Now you can only imagine being that high up that you see a long way. Okay, so you know they had to be able to see the Romans coming. They had to see them long off in the distance. This gigantic army. Remember, 60,000 people came over to destroy Jerusalem. So imagine a gigantic army like that making their way to Masada. And you're standing on top of that mountain and you're looking out and you see them coming. And you think, oh, crap. We're in for it. You know, if they get in here, we're in trouble. But they had to take a little bit of solace in the fact that Masada was an almost impenetrable fortress. I mean, it was way up high. It had really, really thick, several feet thick walls made of stone. And they were about 10, 12 feet high. Okay, so it was going to be very difficult to get into this place. Not only that, but the only way up into the fortress was this path. They call it the snake path. And it looks like a snake. I mean, it's a very narrow path that zigzags its way up the mountain. Okay? You can't fit more than 2 or 3 guys side by side going up this path. So they knew that anybody that wanted to attack had to make their way up that path in order to get to them. And then they could just sit up on top and just pick them off with their bows. You know, and then when they do finally get to hand-to-hand fighting with these guys, you have a narrow corridor there. Okay, now we all know from history the advantages of funneling a larger army into a smaller force that you can deal with. Just look at the Tale of the 300 in Thermopylae, right? The Spartans. That's what they did. They funneled that gigantic Persian army into a smaller area where they could deal with them. And that's why they were able to last so long. So the Sicarii had that advantage as well. Not only do they have the high ground in a fortress that's almost impossible to get into, but also they have to go up this tiny, narrow, winding path up the mountain where the whole way they can just be peppered with arrows. And when they finally do get to the top, only a couple of them at a time can fight. So they think we're in decent shape here, you know. They figure what the Romans are going to do is they're going to come down there and they're going to try to set up a siege to starve them out. A common tactic when you're dealing with a fortress city. And that's exactly what Masada was. It was a city, and it was inside of gigantic walls. It was a fortress. So that's what they figure is going to happen. And they know that they've got millions and millions and millions and millions of gallons of water. They know that they have farms that can grow food. They know that they have tons of dried food, years worth. So they know they're good for multiple years before they even have to worry about running out of anything. So they know that they can outlast the Romans, because remember, the Romans have a gigantic army. And when you have a gigantic army, you have to have supply lines that can feed all of those people. Then you also have to have food and water and everything for all of their servants and all of the animals and all of that. I mean, there's a lot that goes into supporting an army. So they figure they've got the upper hand. And the Romans, if they can get their hands on them, they're gonna wipe them out. But that's the question. Can they get their hands on them? Because they are pretty well fortified up there. So here's what the Romans do. And this is just blows my mind. The Romans get there. The very first thing they do is they set up a wall. They build a wall out of stone, about 12 feet high, all the way around the mountain. 4,000 yards, all the way around. They encircle the entire mountain in a 12-foot wall. That's pretty crazy. Then they set up 8 separate camps, okay? So they've set up a 12-foot wall they built all around the mountain. They put guards all along that wall to make sure nobody can escape. Then they go about building 8 separate camps. Now these camps are their tents, obviously, and like little 4-foot walls to serve as a foundation area for pitching the tents. And then around that area of each camp, they build another 12-foot wall encircling the entire camp. And they do this 8 times all around the mountain. So they've got their army completely surrounding the mountain. They've got 8 camps set up around the mountain and a 12-foot wall surrounding all of that, the entire mountain. That's pretty nuts. Then they're still left with the problem, okay, now we got them in a siege, but we can't get up there because we got to go up this little stupid path. And we're going to get a lot of our guys killed doing that. So if we can't starve them out, and it became apparent fairly early, they're not going to be able to starve them out because they're stocked, man. They got everything they need. So now what do? We got to get up there. But how? That's the question. Here's what the Romans do, and this is absolutely amazing. I'm just in awe of this. They decide they're going to build a ramp from the ground, like 375 yards up to the mountain, to the walls of the fortress, so they can try to get in. Now they don't just pile a bunch of dirt down. They build a wooden framework for this ramp. Okay, it basically consists of like a bunch of uprights and then cross members. So what they're essentially creating is boxes, okay, in varying heights going up, like steps, going all the way up to the fortress walls. Once they get these boxes built, they start filling these boxes completely up with stone to make them sturdy and strong. Then on top of that, they put a bunch of earth. Okay, so they dig a bunch of dirt up and they just pile it on top of that. And they make an earth ramp with a stone and wood foundation underneath of it to support it and make sure it doesn't crumble or shift at all. Pretty amazing engineering. Pretty amazing feat to do. Now keep in mind, this whole time, the Sakuri rebels are still up there. Okay, they can still shoot their bow down at them. So you got to think they're building all this under arrow fire probably. So when they finally get the ramp just about done and they're getting ready to go up this thing, now they still got to deal with the wall. How the hell are we going to get in this wall? I mean, it's thick as hell. It's tall. It's not like we can just put a ladder up and climb it. We're going to get killed. How do we get in? We got to bust our way through somehow. So they decide we're going to build a gigantic battering ram. So we can push it up the hill and try to break through that really, really thick wall. And while we're at it, let's build a bunch of catapults too. So that's what they do. They build a bunch of catapults. They build a pretty badass, gigantic battering ram that is like basically a tower on wheels that they can push up this ramp that has a heavy log-like weight like hanging from it, suspended. So they can swing this thing and hit it into the wall. Boom, 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 right? Now they got to get this monstrosity 375 feet up in the air so that they can start battering the hell out of this wall to try to get in to kill all these dudes in there, right? So that's quite an undertaking as well. You got to think the whole time they're making their way up, man, these rebels have got to be just launching everything they got at them. So you got to have your own archers kind of firing back. And I imagine those catapults they built down at the bottom, they probably are shooting them up there as well at that point, as they're trying to get up this ramp that they made to batter the wall. So they're probably dipping that in oil, like bundles in oil, and lighting them on fire and shooting them over the walls. So you got fires starting to spread all through the fortress of Masada. You've got destruction happening as stones are flung that far as well with catapults. So they're smacking into stuff and breaking stuff and hitting people. You got fires going, smoke everywhere. You got Roman archers shooting at you. You're trying to shoot back. And the whole time you're watching this giant tower, battering ram, making its way up this ramp, coming towards your walls. So the Romans finally get there. It takes a long time, but they finally get there. And they start, boom, boom, smashing this damn battering ram into the wall, trying to break through. Well, this wall is really, really thick and well built. It's strong as hell. Like I said, King Herod the Great built that as a fortress to protect him. So he made sure it was extra strong. So they're just battering the hell out of this wall, fighting, trying to get through. Finally, as it's starting to get dark, they finally start to bust through the wall a little bit. It's starting to fall apart. And according to Josephus, for whatever reason, I guess maybe they wanted to be able to see what they were doing when they went in there. They decide, okay, we got this far. Let's wait till morning when we can see better, when the first light, when dawn comes. Then we'll come back up here, finish busting this wall down, and we'll go in there and kill everybody. They can't get away. We've got the place surrounded. We've got walls everywhere. They're not going anywhere. So they'll be here in the morning. So let's wait till morning when we can actually see better, and our archers will be able to shoot. And we'll be able to see what we're fighting, and we can make sure nobody's hiding and nobody escapes. So that's what the Romans do. They go back down, they sleep. First light, they get up. They make their way back up the mountain. Okay, so that's what the Romans do. So at this time, when it's pretty evident that the Romans are getting in, okay, the wall is starting to give. It's starting to break apart a little bit, and the rebels are pretty sure that their goose is cooked. The Romans are going to get through that wall. It's just a matter of time. And they know once they do, they don't have a chance in hell, because there's way too many of them. They are massively, massively outnumbered. Massively. So they know they're screwed. So what are they going to do? They can't escape. There's no way to escape. The Romans have them surrounded completely. It's impossible to escape. They can't win the fight, so most of them are going to be slaughtered. But some of them might survive if they give up. But what does that mean? What happens if you surrender? Well, if you surrender and the Romans capture you, especially if you're a rebel like this, right? You're doing the things that these guys were doing. Most likely, if you're a man, the most common thing to happen to you would be severe beatings and whippings with what they call a cat o' nine tails, which is like a whip that has many different strands coming off of it. And those strands of leather, these straps, have bits of sharpened metal embedded in them. So it just rips the flesh. They beat Jesus with one. That would happen to you. And then after all that has happened and you're pretty jacked up, then you're going to be crucified, which we all know the story of Jesus. We know crucifixion is nasty. It is one of the worst ways to die. That's what they have to look forward to, the men. Now, what about the women and the children? Because remember, there's families up here. There's a lot of women, a lot of children here as well. Well, the women would be passed around to all the members of the army, and they would have their way with them repeatedly as much as they wanted to. They would be beaten as well, and then they would be sold off into slavery. That's what would have happened. Probably sex slavery somewhere, or they would have been sold off as servants to Roman households. So a lifetime of abuse and slavery. That's what they had to look forward to, the women. What about the kids? Surely the Romans would take mercy on children, right? They wouldn't hurt children. Well, the kids that they were captured, they would have been sold off into slavery as well. The majority of them would have ended up in the copper mines. And they would have been mining copper until they couldn't anymore. And then they'd have been killed. The few lucky ones would have ended up as slaves in Roman households somewhere. But that's very few, because mostly they want adult women to do that. They don't really have much use for children. So most of them would have been working the mines. That sucks too. Horrible way to go. And you're a slave the rest of your life. So that's what they have to look forward to. It's not fun for any of them. So the leader of the rebellion group, he gives this impassioned speech where he talks about freedom and that they can't surrender to Rome, because if they surrender, this is what's going to happen to them. The men will be crucified. The women, bad things that I just talked about, what happened to them. I don't want to say the R word because this is going to go on YouTube as well, and I don't want the video to get taken down. But you know what's going to happen to the women. And the children will be sold off into slavery in the mines. So he says, that's no way to live. We're going to die. Either way you go. There's no way we're surviving this. Either the Romans are going to slaughter us, or we're going to end up dying later as slaves. Let's die free. If we got to die, let's die free people. So they come up with a plan to all commit suicide. That's the plan. Now, obviously not everybody is going to be down with this plan, okay? You got to think there's just under 1,000 people in this place. And I guarantee you not all of them are like, yeah, that's cool, let's do that. I guarantee you a lot of them are like, hell no. But you can make that number a lot smaller because the meeting that they had was just a meeting of the men. Okay? So it wasn't including the women and the children. It was just the men. And it was decided that what would take place is every man would be responsible for killing his wife and killing his children. Then there would be a small group of men, about 10 to 15, that would be responsible for going through and killing all of those other men. Then out of that little group of 10 or 15, there was one man, and they drew lots for this. There was one man who would be responsible for killing the rest of those. And then that one man was left, had the option to either kill himself, which was looked upon as a very grave sin, or take his chances against the Romans and probably be crucified. That's the plan they came up with. So in the morning, when the Romans came back up, they finished busting through the wall and they poured into the place. What they found was almost 1,000 people laying dead. They did the suicide pact. They killed themselves. And the Romans were like, well, now what? This is kind of weird. So they start kind of searching and trying to find anybody that's left. Okay, now remember I said not everybody would have went along with this. And there are people that say that everybody did go along with it, but I don't believe that. And I don't believe that, one, because that just doesn't make logical sense. Not everybody's going to agree to that. But also because the archaeological evidence proves that not everybody went along with that. Okay, there were some survivors, believe it or not, that were alive when the Romans came in. There was 5 children and 2 women. They were found inside of a cistern, hiding. So the Romans got them out. Okay? So most likely what that was one of the men, or several of the men maybe, said, you know what, I'm not doing that. I'm not killing my wife and my kids. They can kiss my ass. I'm just not going to do it. So instead of killing them, he said, go hide down in this cistern down here and just be very quiet and hopefully nobody will find you. And maybe you'll live through this, but I can't kill you. I'm not going to do it. So we know that happened. Right outside of the gate, as you drop down a little, there was a cave there. And 24 people were found there. They were hiding out. It was a mix of men and women. There was teenage girls in there. There was even one that was pregnant that still had the baby inside of her. 24 made their way into that cave. So those are people that did not off themselves. Okay, they didn't go along with that plan, and they made a run for it. And they managed to get into this cave and try to wait it out and hide. They thought maybe the Romans don't know about this cave. You know, they think everybody's in the city. Maybe we can hide in here until they go away and survive. So that's what they attempted to do. The Romans, though, they looked everywhere. They scoured the place looking for survivors that they could pull out, especially after they found the ones in the cistern. They thought, okay, maybe there's other guys and women hiding around here. We can find them. So the Romans ended up finding that cave, and they came in, and those 24 people died in that cave. They were hacked to death in there. Now, I don't know if they fought back or if they didn't fight back or how it went down, but I do know that the archaeologists did not find any weaponry there. So if they did attempt to put up a fight with weaponry, the Romans must have taken it with them. Okay? So that is the story of the siege of Masada. Now, there's people that claim that it didn't happen, even though there's evidence that it did. You have the writings of Josephus. You have the stories of the survivors. You have the stories of the Romans that were there that say that this took place. And their biggest thing they say is they never found all the rest of the bodies. If there was a massive suicide pact, why wasn't all the bodies left? Where are they? That's what they say. But see, the thing is, they're not taking into account that the Romans didn't just destroy this place and leave. They stayed for like 3 or 4 months afterwards. So just imagine you're in that situation. Put yourself there, okay? You're a Roman soldier. You had just taken this place, and there's almost 1,000 people laying dead all over the street. What do? Do you just hang out there and live for 4 months with rotting corpses all around you? Of course not. You're going to try to get rid of those corpses. You're going to do something so they don't stink up the joint, right? The way the Romans usually did it was they'd take all of the bodies and they would pile them up and they would burn them. That was common practice. That's what the Romans did. So most likely that's what happened to all those bodies. They were most likely drugged somewhere and burnt. And I would almost bet that they weren't burnt right there in the walls of Masada, because the Romans have to live there. So even if you burn the bodies, it's going to smell horrible. So why the hell would you want that where you're living? Most likely they took the bodies and they carried them off and they burnt them somewhere else. You know, they probably didn't take them all the way down the ramp and all that. They might have just chucked them over the side of the wall, down to the bottom there somewhere, and then went down there and burned them. You know, that's probably what happened, something like that. And I guarantee you at some point in the future, they'll find them. You know, if they keep looking, they'll eventually find what happened to those bodies. But you're not going to find it in the walls of Masada. I'd almost guarantee that. Simply because why? Why the hell would you want to live with 1,000 corpses if you're going to be there for 4 months? That makes no sense. Not only the smell and just the grossness of it, but you got to think about all the disease and all of the insects. You know, the flies are going to be buzzing around. The buzzards that are going to be coming in and trying to pick the bones clean. That's a lot of mess. That's a lot of annoyance. That's gross, man. You're not going to want to deal with that. And a lot of your guys are going to get sick because of all of these corpses there. So it just doesn't make any sense at all that the Romans would just leave them if they stayed there for 4 months. And we know that they stayed there for 4 months because that's in the Roman records. So why would there be bodies? Another thing is, we know that Josephus's account was relatively accurate, because if it wasn't, then Flavius, who was the head of that army, right, who's made like the ruler of Judea, the governor, if Josephus's account was not correct, then Flavius, when he read it, would have said, this is BS, dude. This didn't happen. But he didn't. Right? You know he was able to read it. You know that he did because it's his battle. Of course he's going to read it. It was a very well-known writing. So if it was not correct, if it was making up stories, then it would have been disputed, but it was never disputed. So that means that the people that were actually there agreed with what Josephus said. Yeah, that's the way it went down, dude. You know? So that's a pretty spectacular story. And it's a pretty spectacular battle. And the reason I say it's the Alamo of the ancient world is because to the Jewish people, Masada became a rallying cry. And, you know, like with the Texans, it was remember the Alamo. Remember what that prick Santa Anna did at the Alamo. And we're going to make them pay. And they did make them pay. Sam Houston and the boys, they took them out. Okay? They whooped some ass. So the Alamo was a rallying cry for the Texans. And Masada became that for the Jewish people. That it was such a noble story that these people would rather die free than live as slaves. That was kind of the gist of it, you know. And it became this legendary tale of bravery and the spirit of the Jewish people. So that's why I call it the Alamo of the ancient world. So let me know down in the comments section once this hits YouTube what you guys think about it. It's a pretty spectacular story. What would you do in that situation? If you were one of those people that were in that fortress and you saw that gigantic Roman army coming for you and you knew it was just a matter of time, what would you do? Would you go out fighting? Would you try to escape like the 24 down in that cave did and then end up dead that way? Or would you off yourself? Let me know. I think I'd go out fighting probably. Simply because I'm not the type that could off myself. That would never happen. You know, I would rather be tortured and crucified than just give up, you know. Because you got to think, too, the Jewish people, man, they've seen miracles in their life. Moses parted the Red Seas. You know, they've been delivered from Egypt, from bondage. They've seen miracles. So how do you know that there's not going to be another miracle? You know, they saw David slay Goliath. They saw the walls of Jericho fall. They could have thought maybe there might be a miracle here and something's going to happen, that God's going to do something to save us from the Romans. So why would you off yourself? I think that it's telling that it got to the point where they were getting ready to break through the wall for the Jewish people to say, oh, screw it. Let's just off ourselves. You know, they held on all that time. And this took place over a long period of time. Some people say 7 weeks. Some people say as far as 6 months. There's no real record of exactly how long the siege lasted. But that's a long time to sit there knowing you're going to die, you know. So anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. I'm going to throw over to Old Boy and see what he thinks about this. And then I'll be back to wrap up afterwards. So Old Boy, go ahead, brother.
So this is a new one. I'm not going to do a lot on this because it's going to be more of James's thing. It's more of a history and a battle in ancient Israel, by Israel at the time. The surge of Mesida. I'm probably messing this word up. These ones are hard for me to do because this is more of a, like I said, ancient history. I love history, but it's harder for me to do this. It's going to be a not the best show for me. It's not my strengths. So my opinions on this, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. I'll talk, you know what we'll do is I'll talk a little bit about it first. So supposedly this is this giant area right before ancient Jerusalem. And there was this place, it's right by you could see out to the Red Sea. I think it's the Red Sea. The Dead Sea, not the Red Sea. Sorry, Dead Sea. I'm getting confused. The Dead Sea, this giant fortress, and it looked like a diamond almost, like if you see it, you can go look it up. They have it because it overlooks Israel now. It's 410 meters up, and it's like Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings, guys. I know you guys seen the Lord of the Rings movie where they go there and they fight the goblins and the trolls and that giant mountainside where it's a big fortress and it's hard to get in. But they found, there was a area they found that they got in somehow, and just kind of like Helm's Deep. I know you guys have seen the Lord of the Rings. That's where I'm trying to compare this, and I also think that he might have got that from this story, because I know that he was a religious person, the guy, the guy who wrote the Lord of the Rings books, so Tolkien. And maybe he got that story from there because it was that fortress, like King Harold hid there. And King Harold actually went there when he was, I think it was fighting the Philistines. I think he was hiding from them. Or the Pharaohs, I forget which one it was, but he actually made the fortress even better and higher, and he added farming and what do they call that? Warehouses to keep food, and he also got water, so you could stay there for long periods of time as there's surges. So the Sakiri, that's what their name. It was supposedly a terrorist group from the Romans. It was a Jewish rebel group, Zoyots or Seots, that's what they called them. and they were against the Jew. They would start wars against the Romans. So what happened is I guess there was a war, and I think it was 72 CE to 73 CE. I think it was over a year or a little over that. And they hid there because that was their last line of defense, because they've been fighting them forever. So they went up there and they hid. And apparently the Romans finally broke through, because they were up there for over a year. And that's where a lot of people would go. This is like a big fortress. If you look at it online, you could see it. It's crazy looking. And it would be very hard to get in up there, because you've got to climb and fight, and it would take a long time to take it over, pretty much. If you guys look at it, you'll see what it looks like. You can go online and look it up. It's pretty neat, crazy story, because the stuff had happened. I think most of them committed suicide when the Romans broke through. I think it was 968 or 70 or something, almost 1,000. And then they took a couple of them captured. I think they killed them. And, sorry guys, I'm stretching my back. Sorry, long day at work. And it's getting colder out here, guys. You know how the winter comes. It's almost December. So what I was reading a little bit about this, they took it over and they killed themselves, majority of them, so they wouldn't get captured. And I think the ones that did, the Romans did, the Romans, they do bad things to them. They killed them. I think they hanged a couple. I don't think they killed them, and a couple other things I was reading they did. What was the other thing? Like I said, King Harold went there. I think David went there too, what I was reading. There was wars that people would run up there to they were getting beat in the war. They would go up there because it was almost impossible to get up there. And I guess the Romans finally figured a way up, and they got in and decided, instead of going down with the ship, they did a mass suicide and killed themselves. The Sicarii. I think that's how you're saying. I'm probably saying it wrong in Maceda. In the Surge of Maceda. I'm killing it probably, guys. So bear with me. Like I said, I'm not the best with words. I've told you guys, if you watch the show, I'm horrible with words. This is not my thing. Again, this is a different show, and I've done some studying on it, but this is more of a very history, if you're really smart, kind of show. and I'm not going to do any of this one any justice, but I'm going to try, guys. Again, I'm not the biggest educational person. This is going to be one of those ones where I'm not going to give you too much history. James is going to. In my opinion is, I would probably hide this place, what I was reading, and where you could see it if you look at it. Back then, I mean, you looked at 410 meters, it's huge. It's up there. You're not going to get in there. And it's up by cliffs and rocks. You guys see it. You could see it. You could see the Dead Sea across the way. And then you could see Israel down there. And this was their stronghold. And it was pretty neat. You could check it out. They show pictures of it on Wikipedia, online. They always have pictures of everything. So just check it out, guys, if I was you. Again, this is another one where I'm not going to have too much to say. I looked up pretty much a little bit, and hopefully James could do a better job, because I'm horrible of saying words. And this is something that I told, he knows that. And Mesa, the Surge of Mesa, see, Meseda, I think it's Meseda, is a really cool story, but it's just a lot to it, man. Like, there's a lot of stuff people did. They went up there and hid, and from the Romans, of course. Who wouldn't? At the time, the Romans were pretty... You guys know what they did. There's nothing to talk about other than we know what they did. They destroyed almost the world. They almost took over the world at one time. If you guys remember, it wasn't just Israel. They took over a lot of places. They captured Greece. They captured... Apparently, they captured parts of Israel in the Middle East. Again, like I said, I'm not a big history person. Sorry, guys. I feel embarrassed because I'm not a big... This one was a little bit hard for me. If you guys can check it out, like I said, we're going to do a little bit on this. James is going to give you a whole bunch of information, guys. I can't do what he does. But check it out. Go take pictures of it because it's a really pretty place, man. It's up there. And if you were going to, like I said, if you were going to build a battle station and defenses, that's where you would go, like Helm's Deep. You're not going to probably get in there. It's almost impenetrable. And it was. If you check it out, look how high it is. It's a crazy sight. But like I said, just bear with me. Look at it. Like I said, go look at Helm's Deep. That's the best way I can describe it. Very big fortress. There's a lot of stuff you could do. You could survive there for a long time. And they did. There was many wars there. Many people survived. The Romans just figured it out. Eventually, it's going to get figured out. Somebody's smart enough. They figured it out how to get in. It took them a while, but they did. Just like in Helm's Deep, they blew up like if you've seen where the sewers were, if you ever seen the Lord of the Ring movies, and I know most of you have, they found it where they were dumping their sewer and they made a mistake and didn't have guards there, or they didn't cover it up. They didn't think about it because they were too worried of coming in and guarding everything, and they didn't think about that, there's a hole there with a sewer system. They blew it up, and that's how they got into the walls. Now, I know that's not the way they did it there. I think they finally just battled through it. The Romans just kept coming and coming, and eventually, like I said, you can only fight so many people, and they finally got through, and they killed themselves, majority of them. Other armies hid there, like I said. Harold, he actually upgraded the place, made it even more difficult to get in. If I was looking at it, if I was back in that day, that's probably where I would have went and got my defenses, put a stronghold. You could hide, I was reading 4,000 or 5,000 people up there. So, and it works. You have food, you have water, you have sources of irrigation. You can survive for a long time up there, and they did, probably forever. It's like a big city up there. You look at it, you could tell there was stuff there. And I think there's stuff there still, like where they would have it. You're totally fine. It's just, my personal opinion is you can only... What, are you going to live there forever? You can hide, but eventually it's just going to get too many people. Breeding and stuff happens. Even though it was a huge place, it's still not big enough for that long. Breeding populations would have done them in the first place. Again, the Surge of Masada is pretty crazy. They all killed themselves. They weren't going to get captured by the Romans, and I get why. So that's why they killed themselves, pretty much. You guys, I would always like to hear your comments. Again, this is not my expertise. I've tried to do my best on these ones because I'm not a big history person. I like history, but I'm not that person that's going to look up all this stuff. I looked up some of it, and I saw of it, and I knew it was going to be a hard show to talk about. Not for James, because he's very intellectual, and this stuff he enjoys. This is not my powers. And that's why I said, I was like, fuck. How am I going to do this show? I looked up a lot of it and looked up some of the history, and I could do that's cool. And, he's going to do most of that. So what am I going to talk about? What happened, or what are my opinions? It happened. There's no doubt about that. So there's nothing I'm going to argue with it. Is it the right move? They killed themselves. I don't know. Probably because the Romans were probably going to make them look like examples. They were going to either crucify them, send them to the lions, kill them in public, torture them, probably sell the women and children to slaves. And I get why they did what they did, and they were going to kill the men. That's what happened back then. We know that. People who got conquered didn't end well for you. The Vikings happened, they did it, and it happened to them. The Romans did it and got conquered. Persians, same thing. Did it, sold, made slaves, made armies, and they got finally beat. Genghis Khan, another one, he killed so many people. He's killed like 10 to 50. That's another show I would like to do, is about Genghis Khan eventually. And the Mongols. Man, that guy killed like 12, 13% of the population or something, not even more than that, maybe 15. I have to look that up. I don't want to get quoted on that because somebody said, oh, this, and I know somebody will, but he killed a lot of people. I know that in his soldiers. That would be a great story to do. A couple other ones we could do and I always like to do shows. It always opens up for another ones is, other wars that happened. The Art of the Covenant. I would love to do a show about that because that's religious and it can tie into extra aliens and extraterrestrials. Indiana Jones, because it was in that movie, The Raiders of the Ark, Lost Ark. And it's supposed to be a weird, crazy weapon. And I'm trying to promote it just so that, one day we can do the show. We always do shows and like pop it off of the next shows and give you a preview. Another thing is it's going to be in December, at the end of December. I think it was on Christmas Day or the day after. Our 7-year anniversary is Staring into the Abyss. 7 years we've been doing this. In July will be 7 years since we've been on Parax Radio. We've been on there for a little over 6 years and a half. So just remember that, guys. I can't believe that's 7 years. I think we have almost 300 episodes or more, somewhere around there. And you guys can always check them out on James Hirsch's YouTube page, guys. That being said, there you go, Hershey. That's all I got to say. I love you guys, and thank you for 7 wonderful years. And we'll talk about it down the line in the next couple months. Or not next couple months, the next couple weeks. Because it's going to be next month in like a couple days. So we appreciate you. We love you guys. Thank you for your support for the last 7 years. I've been loving in another 70 years. We'll be here forever. And even after that, you can always listen to our shows for free. And it will always be like that. So that being said, I love you guys. And there you go. That was my opinion. I hope you guys enjoyed the story, the show also. It was a little bit different history of stuff that's happened in the past. If you guys enjoyed it, please share your comments. We always like to hear from you. Leave your comments. Try not to argue. Try not to fight. Most of the time you guys don't. But, some people don't care. You guys want to subscribe to James Hirsch's YouTube page? Go ahead. Check us out on Parax Radio every Sunday nights. 12 Eastern AM, 9 Pacific. And the Best of Show Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific time. You guys can get merchandise, shirts, all kinds of hats, all kinds of cool stuff. Just let us know. Or you can go to the site. He'll tell you where to go. Check us out on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and everything else, pretty much now. I hope you guys have a good night, Misfits, Shigways, Monster Lovers, and Demon Hunters. And I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Here comes Christmas, guys, and New Year's. Motherfuckers, have a good night. And blessed be.
Thank you, brother. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. I hope that it was interesting. I hope you learned something. And let me know, like I said before, down in the comments section, what you guys think. What would you do? Either way, it's a pretty awesome story, I think. I mean, just as I'm a storyteller, that's what I do. And to me, this is a badass story. So let me know down in the comments section. As always, it's up to you to make up your own mind. And we'll catch you on the next one. Till we speak to you again. Love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.